It's well known that many executions of Nazi criminals were actually recorded at the end of the war. However, many reports show that a large number of these people were never put on trial. Instead, they were killed by resistance fighters, Soviet soldiers, local civilians, and former prisoners who had just been freed from camps. Before we continue, a warning: the content of this video is extremely disturbing. Today we will talk about several violent cases involving the killing of Nazis during this period. This video is meant only to inform, does not portray anyone as innocent. The people involved had committed acts just as cruel and often worse during the war. In one military report is mentioned that a scout soldier named Chekhov was unable for a long time to bring back enemy soldiers alive. Later, the reason became clear. He had learned that Nazi troops had killed civilians in his hometown. His sister, and probably more than one sister, had been raped and murdered. After learning this, Chekhov beat captured Nazi soldiers to death using only his hands. In another recorded case, after the liberation of Belarus, local civilians executed a former concentration camp guard. The Red Army had asked civilians to help build an airfield. One worker stood out because he worked very hard and never complained. After watching him closely, villagers recognized him as a former guard from Koldichevo camp, where tens of thousands of Soviet citizens had been killed. The villagers tied the man up and informed a nearby officer. The officer ordered his soldiers to tie the guard to the back of a horse. The horse was released at full speed. The man's body was torn apart as it was dragged across the unfinished airfield. Another horrifying event happened after a tank unit entered the village at night and caught the enemy completely by surprise. The German soldiers surrendered with almost no resistance. They were locked inside a barn while the soldiers waited for orders. When the tank crew opened the barn doors, they saw something shocking. Two beams were hanging from the ceiling. One held the bodies of children, the other held farm animals. The children were arranged by height, from tallest to shortest. The animals were hung the same way. The officers stood in shock. Without waiting for orders, one tank driver started his engine and drove directly into the group of prisoners, crushing several of them under the tank. After the children and animals were buried together in a mass grave, the remaining prisoners were forced to carry the destroyed bodies back into the barn. On the side, all remaining prisoners were killed with tank fire. Among partisan fighters, mercy was hard. In the forests, there were no rules or formal trials. Captured German soldiers were often killed immediately. In one winter case, a German prisoner was stripped naked. His genitals were cut off and placed in his mouth. His frozen body was left by the road with a sign around his neck that read, "Mom, give me an egg." Partisans usually decide how prisoners would die based on what crimes the Nazis had committed nearby. The villagers had been burned, partisans sometimes burned German soldiers, and local collaborators live in the forest. Often, collaborators were drowned in swamps. This method requires no bullets, which were very scarce. In other cases, German soldiers were forced to run through minefields until no one survived. This practice appeared after Nazis had forced civilians to clear mines, killing many people in explosions. Some of the most brutal killings were carried out by so-called wild partisans. These were groups that did not follow military rules and acted on pure revenge. For them, a firing squad was seen as two kinds. Writer Sheremet described one such group in a report sent to Soviet leadership. He wrote that Ferodov's partisans were especially cruel. personally saw them beating collaborators until they bleed, cutting them with knives, burning their hair, tying them by their feet, dragging them through the forest behind horses, and pouring boiling tea over their bodies. In one village, a group of captured German soldiers was executed in public. Mustard was placed on the tails of horses, causing the animals to panic and run wildly. This scene, as terrifying, was meant to scare others away from helping the occupiers. Sometimes collaborators were forced to kill each other. In one village, 23 local police collaborators were captured. The partisan leaders said there were too many prisoners and that not all were needed. Half would go with the group and half would stay behind. The prisoners were locked in a barn and told them to decide among themselves who would leave, using the firewood inside. Inside the barn, they began killing one another with wooden beams. The survivors were later executed anyway. Bayonet killings were also common. In one case, a partisan asked what should be done with captured enemies. When stabbing was suggested, a man named Salisnev, his entire family had been burned alive by Nazis. He ordered the prisoners to lie down one by one and stabbed each of them. Captured German spies were usually killed quietly. Once identified, they were poisoned through food or killed silently at night by cutting their throats. Some of the most organized executions of Nazis happened in areas controlled by American forces after the war. Special groups carried out their killings, driven by revenge or the murder of Jewish families. The exact number of victims is unknown, but some historians believe it reached into the thousands. Victims were killed in many ways. Some were thrown from windows, others were drowned, blown with grenades, or killed silently. After the war, Landsberg prison became a major execution site for Nazi war criminals. Hanging was the most common method. Years earlier, Adolf Hitler himself had been held in Lembergsburg after a failed coup attempt. While there, he wrote his book with help from close allies. The prison became a place for political prisoners, medical experiments, and detention before transfers to camp. Conditions worsened as the war continued, and many prisoners died from starvation or execution. And many prisoners died from starvation or execution. Later, the prison became infamous again. This time is a holding site to captured Nazi criminals awaiting execution under American supervision. Over several years, hundreds of war criminals were executed there. Most were hanged, some were shot. Execution often happened long after sentencing, sometimes a year later. Executions were carried out over multiple days. In one case, it took several days to execute former camp guards. Prisoners lived normal prison lives until their execution dates. Many asked for mercy. A chaplain stayed with them during their final hours, offering prayers and comfort. The prison had two gallows that could be used at the same time. Guards confirmed each prisoner identified before execution. Photos were often taken just before the hanging. Once the hood was placed off the prisoner's head, the trapdoors were opened. The body fell and was later placed in a coffin. Families could claim the remains. Those not claiming were buried near the prison chapel. Many high-ranking Nazi officers were executed there, including senior SS leaders and camp commanders. Some well-known figures narrowly escaped execution. Eventually, control of the prison returned to German authorities, and the last prisoners were released. In total, around 300 Nazi war criminals were executed at Lundersberg after World War II. Many of them were responsible for extreme cruelty and the death of thousands. Thank you for watching until the end. If this channel was brought value to you, consider supporting that project so we can continue. May God bless you, and we see you soon. Bye.